What's up, everybody? This is Grant at Cause Artist. In episode 204 of the Disruptors for Good podcast, I speak with Nina Rauch, Senior Social Impact Lead at Lemonade, on leading social impact initiatives from startup to IPO. Nina discusses her journey into social impact, starting with the founding of Pink Week, an organization aimed at raising awareness of breast cancer among young people. She shares the lessons she learned from starting Pink Week and the importance of passion and putting oneself out there. Nina then talks about her transition into corporate roles and the preconceptions she had about corporate impact. She highlights the B Corp certification process and the importance of authenticity and transparency in social impact efforts. Nina also discusses Lemonade's give back model and the impact it has had on various causes. When you get a chance, please share, rate, and subscribe. Now, let's get into the episode. Well, thank you so much, Nina, for joining me today. I know we've talked, over the years off and on, and through email, and now we finally get to talk like this, to talk about a little bit of your impact journey, and then specifically with your leading social impact at Lemonade, which is, for those who don't know, it is a public company. It's one of only 2 B Corps, I believe, that are public companies right now. So a big role at a big company. And I think, more and more, I think people are getting into leading social impact efforts, sustainability efforts, whatever, type of efforts that these companies want to approach. They're hiring talent to specifically go in these roles. And so I really think that's an interesting place and an interesting education point and tips that you can give or advice you can give for future, leaders going into these roles at larger corporations. But before we get into that, talk a little bit about, your journey. Just from what I've read, it seemed like, your impact journey started with an unfortunate thing in your life, but came out of it with something called Pink Week. So maybe we could just start there and then we'll get into a few different things.
Definitely. So thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I've been following your work for a long time. So my trajectory into social impact was almost unintentional. I lost my mother when I was 14 to breast cancer, and that prompted me to look around a little bit at the nonprofit sector, but specifically at breast cancer awareness charities and nonprofits and who their target audience was. And I grew up in a household where breast cancer was very much part of the conversation, but when I went to school and university, it wasn't there. And we weren't really being targeted by these same nonprofits. So I founded my own organization, Pink Week, which specifically aimed to raise awareness of breast cancer amongst my peers, so amongst Gen Z and younger generations that were just being missed by the same nonprofits. And that really propelled me into the social impact space. I started Pink Week when I was around 16. Wow. I brought it to university with me, and it spread all across the UK and even to the US, and raised around $500,000 when I was in charge, but continues to raise hundreds of thousands just from young students raising awareness of breast cancer. So it's something I feel really, really proud of and really excited by, and continue to feel inspired by the work that they are still doing.
That's amazing. Through that work, what were some of the things that you learned that it's interesting doing something that young, starting something that young? You have this sort of like great ignorance of doing something really hard it's not something you really think about. You're just passionate about it and you just do it. Somehow we lose that as we grow older a little bit. We look at all the things that can go wrong, and I think it sort of hinders us from starting things. I guess talk about, those years you spent doing it, building it. What are some of the lessons that you learned from that time?
Well, it's funny. I actually the other day was going through my old emails, and I found the very first email I sent when I was trying to start Pink Week, which originally just started off as one day in my high school called Pink Day. And I sent an email to Breast Cancer Now, which is one of the largest breast cancer charities. Said, "Hi, I'm doing a fundraiser at my school. I need 300 breast cancer badges and I need them by tomorrow. Is this possible?" So, nowadays I wouldn't even think to ask for something so last minute, but like you said, then you just kind of go for it. So I really started to build something, like I said, almost by accident. We started by just fundraising by selling badges, and then more and more people wanted to get involved. And I think one of my greatest lessons from it was just putting ourselves out there, asking for things and pushing, and also just being aware that passion is a real driver for so many young people, but it's often not tapped into. And people just wanted to get involved and be excited about Pink Week. I didn't even need to do much encouraging, just no nonprofits had really approached them before in the same way. So there was this whole untapped audience that were waiting to get involved, but just hadn't had the tools. And I think that was definitely a big lesson for me.
So that time spent, how long was that before you did you go directly into corporate roles in sort of the impact area within organizations? I guess, what was that path like?
So I had to make a pretty hard decision with Pink Week, which is I decided that it kind of became, and, I'll be honest, it was difficult being a founder, and it was definitely difficult being a founder of an organization that was centered around breast cancer. It was a very, remained a really sensitive topic for me. So at some point I kind of decided to step away, and I looked at other different, nonprofits and sectors. So I worked for a refugee charity and an environmental charity, just seeing what was out there, because I felt at that point, after I moved away from Pink Week, like any founder knows, you put your whole life and soul into something, and then you almost have to reevaluate every decision you've made up until that point. So I knew I wanted to work in nonprofits. I knew that perhaps the breast cancer space was just a bit too personal. So I started looking at different sectors. And actually, after working for a few different nonprofits, that's when I decided to move into the corporate space.
What was some of your initial feelings about corporate impact? I guess, did you have any pre-existing sort of notions about what it was like? Because, we hear the term greenwashing so much, and, it's sort of, the bad players in it sort of, overtake the actual real work that's done by corporations and businesses around the world that actually put time and effort into doing these things. I guess, so did you have any preconceived notions as you were going into the corporate world, specifically on the impact side?
100%. 100%, especially insurance. The fact that I ended up working for an insurtech that was driven by social impact, that's not a sentence I thought I would ever say. I really believed that the most meaningful work could be found in nonprofits. And actually now, when I speak to people who are looking for advice about transitioning into the social impact sector, I always say that the worst piece of advice I was ever given was that if you're looking for a meaningful career, only look at the nonprofit sector. And actually, when I was told to think outside the box and started looking at corporate social impact, that's when the game changed for me.
Yeah.
But I will say, in terms of preconceptions, I really understand where people are coming from. And I think a good filter for that is the B Corp. So the B Corp model, which Lemonade, the company that I work for, is a B Corp. And when I started to filter through for-profits and corporates that I wanted to apply for jobs at that were, that had social impact avenues, I used the B Corp filter, because I think that's a really clear distinguisher between companies that might just be doing it to say they're doing good and companies that are really doing good. As someone who's now just completed Lemonade's third B Corp certification, and trust me, it's pretty complicated.
It's intense, huh?
It's not easy. I see firsthand that B Corp is a true certification of a good company. So I do think there are ways to weed out companies that are kind of just doing good for the sake of it and ones that really mean it.
For those who don't know what Lemonade is, in broad strokes, like, what's sort of Lemonade in a nutshell, like its mission and vision? Just from a pure sort of business point of view, and then we'll get into the stuff you're working on.
I'll give you the elevator pitch.
Yeah.
So Lemonade is an insurtech. It's powered by AI and social impact. We have an alternative business model that is really disrupting the insurance industry. So unlike most traditional insurance companies, a portion of our underwriting profits go directly to nonprofits that our Lemonade customers choose. So for example, if I'm a Lemonade customer, I'll see a whole drop-down list of nonprofits that are personally vetted, and we know that they're good organizations. We know where every single dollar goes, and I can choose to donate unclaimed premiums at the end of the year directly to these organizations. And we use AI and technology to not only seamlessly deal with our claims, but equally to allow our customers to give back seamlessly. So that's what I think is really cool, is that the AI integration is not only used to improve the customer experience in terms of the product and in terms of insurance itself, but also in the way that that customers approach social impact.
So what does your team sort of focus on? It's a big company, but it's a B Corp, so it's sort of, it has impact embedded in it, right? Just at its foundational level. So already it sort of has this foundational element to it that, attracts a lot of people. What does your team specifically do? Like, what's sort of your day to day, and which your sort of departments, like overall goals and missions?
So I would say that the social impact strategy at Lemonade is broken down into a few different pillars. We're very focused on sustainability. Once we IPO'd and became a public company, what comes with going public is also a lot of environmental regulations, especially if you're an insurance company. And that's something we take really seriously. We work on the B Corp certification, which happens every 3 years. We've just completed the process, like I said, but it took about 1.5 years. Wow. And it really sees a whole overview of the company's operations, of how we work with our customers, of employee standards. It breaks down everything. It judges our governance and social values. So it's a really heavy process, but it's an integral part of our impact strategy. We're also working with about 100 different nonprofits globally, so throughout Europe, the UK, and the US, and we're verifying where every donation goes, expanding on projects that we've already done with them. So, for example, with New Story, we are funding one specific community in El Salvador, and we continue to work with them year after year. And then the last thing that we really focus on is employee volunteering. So social impact is really strong externally, but it's important to me that our employees feel it as well. So we have a very clear volunteering program that we use, a platform called Deed. I'm not sure if you've come across them, but yeah, they're a super cool social impact platform that just really helps companies integrate employee volunteering. And we have around 3 to 4 volunteering events every quarter. So really trying to make sure that our social impact strategy is very holistic. I
want to talk a little bit about the give back model. So for many people who don't know, like, what unclaimed sort of money is, it seems like once a year you tally up the unclaimed money left from, I guess, sort of policies or whatever, and that goes to nonprofits that the client chooses. I guess maybe walk through that a little bit more.
Yeah, of course. It sounds very complicated, but essentially every insurance company will set aside money that's used to pay out claims. So what Lemonade does is, instead of keeping that money for profit, we use that money, which is technically Lemonade's profit. So a lot of people sometimes get confused and think it's customer money. It's definitely not. But what's cool about it is, even though it's Lemonade's profit, or for lack of a better term, the customer actually chooses where that money goes. So you have control over where the money is being distributed. And to date, we've donated over $8 million, which is, like, it blows me away even just saying it out loud, even as an employee, because what an incredible thing to do that just kind of happens automatically. And it really makes me believe that, giving back in philanthropy, corporate philanthropy especially, it doesn't need to be overcomplicated. Like, the customer doesn't even need to think twice about it. They choose a nonprofit, and at the end of the year, that money gets donated directly, and the money really builds up. So I think it just shows that if we as companies can integrate social impact or giving back into the product before we even launch, like Give Back was a part of Lemonade before launch, you can have this donation process that really builds up over time.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think starting out as a tech company at its core, I think it just helps with a lot of the ability to embed analytics in this, embed automation into this, embed it sort of in the holistic business model of everything. It's going to, when you look at, like, historically, companies that started so far back, like, they don't have tech quite embedded in their ethos as, like, a company that is born in tech. I feel like they sort of tend to build these blocks at the foundational level, and especially with, like, B Corp tech companies, more and more are coming out. I think that layer is obviously, I think it's a great initiation for customers, because if they see that sort of badge, everything has its pros and cons. Even with B Corp, there's stuff that, like, they're getting better at, they need to work on, right? There's no perfect thing to anything. But you mentioned the process. Like, it is such a challenging thing. And it is a big deal when you get sort of that label of B Corp stamp of approval, let's say. What was that initial process like for the first year? I guess walk through that process, because I think a lot of people know the B Corp status, but they don't know what it takes to actually get sort of certified. So maybe if you can give a little light into what that process is like.
Of course, it changed so much. I wish I could go back 6 years. So when Lemonade first became a B Corp, it was before we'd even sold our first policy. So you're talking about a team of maybe 6 to 10 employees, one market, one office that was actually part of a WeWork. So you didn't even have your own landlord or your own environmental standards that you need to keep to. You're more subject to the, overall office plans. And now fast forward 6 years, we've just recertified for the third time with, nearly 2,000 employees. We have 4 offices. We have global markets. So we've expanded all throughout the US. It's a completely different beast. And, I always say this, but I really was not prepared for how different the B Corp process would be, which is credit to how thorough they are, because obviously a certification has to change based on a company that's scaled so much. But especially as a public company, you're obviously subject to a lot more scrutiny. So the process was much more complicated than it was the first time. Obviously, they're broken into 5 different categories. There's governance, environmental, workers, customer relations, and climate policy as well. And when you even think about kind of the employee standards, you're now looking at employee standards in every single office. We've incorporated remote workers. So it's just a much more complicated process when you're dealing with a lot more people. There's around 85 questions, and you need to submit paperwork that proves your claims for every single question. So you can't just answer yes or no. You have to upload evidence of everything that you're claiming. So it really, really was difficult. But when we got to the other end, we actually just recertified, I think, yesterday. Now that we're through to the other end, I feel really proud that we've done it, because I think if we're able to do it as a company of this size and with a public standing, it means that we really are a good company at our core, which is something that B Corp tries to verify. And I feel like they are verifying it successfully.
Well, you're in an interesting spot because you get to kind of see the data and what people, choose as their organizations or as sort of just their overall causes that they give back to. What's that look like from your point of view? What are some of the overall maybe like sectors that you see the majority of, Lemonade clients, insurance policy owners, like what are they choosing to get back to?
So actually, I think it's fascinating, because one practice that I do every year after we do our annual give back is I compare our Lemonade customer giving trends to global giving trends in order to understand where our customers are directing their money versus perhaps where there are gaps in global giving. Our most popular donation choice is actually to the environment. 350.org is our most popular cause chosen by our customers. Last year, we gave around 12% to environmental causes, and actually only 3% of global giving in the US and globally goes to, which is really interesting, because we hear so much talk about the environment and there's so many climate policies being implicated, but actually only 3% goes to climate giving. We also do a big donation to LGBTQ+, whereas in global giving is around 3.4%, and Lemonade last year was around 10%, I want to say. And one that we've seen a big jump in since COVID over the last few years has been healthcare. So actually around 22% of our give back went to healthcare. We've seen a really big jump in that. And I think that makes sense. There's been so many missed appointments due to COVID. There's been a lot of delays. A lot of people were at home and, became carers during that period. So it's really great that we're able to kind of redesignate that funding and make sure that those in the healthcare sector are supported.
That's interesting that it's, because you're right that we do hear a lot of environmental stuff from, the corporate level or big donors, right? But I think maybe because it feels so huge of a problem for us as like individual people, where we feel like, oh, we'd rather donate to like, homeless shelters or domestic battery shelters or animal shelters, something that's sort of tangible that we know in our community that it kind of makes a difference, where environmental nonprofits seems like a bigger challenge, where our, small amount of dollars compared to companies and, larger philanthropic efforts giving millions. that might be, maybe that's a reason why we don't see it at the lower, just the individual donor level going that route.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. We're so
Yeah.
driven as individuals to be told that we have to make a direct impact and we can be responsible for, reverting climate change. But obviously, we all know that it actually happens on a governmental and climate level. And the most that we can do is really advocate again, for our governments and for climate policy change, which we're starting to see happen a lot more frequently. And I certainly see it from the insurance side. A lot more companies are being subject to climate regulation. Lemonade was actually the first US insurer to forswear any investment in fossil fuels and coal. And we're seeing a lot of other insurance companies follow suit. So, it is something that's picking up, but you're right. It's definitely reflected in individual giving.
Okay, we're talking about, a public company, a lot of moving parts, 2,000 employees. Where does your team like fit in sort of the stack of the company? Do you have a lot of conversations with the marketing team, with the finance team, with the sales team? I guess, where do you guys fit in? Do you feel like, you're kind of alone doing your own thing, or are you sort of a part of, the ecosystems? I always picture like big companies, like the impact team is sort of siloed and kind of doing their own thing, right? Because you're kind of based on the revenue, I guess, or the profits that the company makes, and then you sort of come in and kind of do that. That's how I think of it. But it seems like maybe it's a little bit more intertwined here.
Yeah, Lemonade definitely feels intertwined. I feel like I work incredibly closely with our legal team, our governance team, definitely our customer team, because we have a lot of customer interaction around Give Back. Whenever something changes in the world or, we see a global event, there'll be an influx of customer requests to add a new nonprofit or to edit our nonprofit list. So it's really a way of, keeping an eye on the beat of the customer and what the customer cares about. We do a lot of work also of, in terms of like marketing our impact and how we talk about it externally, how we talk about it on socials. So I know that at other companies, I've spoken to a lot of social impact professionals. It can often seem like the social impact team is very much to the side or separate. But I think because impact is so integrated into the product at Lemonade, it's very difficult to make that separation. And it's a very integral part of day-to-day there.
You mentioned there's, I think, over 100 organizations that you guys work with. Like, how are you and your team sort of, choosing that? Is that sort of looked at every 3 or 5 years, or, or are they just the 100 is sort of chosen? Like, how are those chosen? And are those maybe the data you see from the customers nominating sort of organizations and again, maybe adding some to the list? And, how does that part work where customers get to see what they can choose from?
Yeah, of course. So we actually review our charities every year. About every 9 to 12 months, we do a review of all the causes that we work with, just to make sure that they're still the causes that we want to be working with, that they haven't experienced any scandal or crisis throughout the year, and that we feel comfortable with the transparency level. And we also want to make sure that we have causes that reflect what's going on in the world. And because of our tech, it makes it really easy for us to add a cause. So for example, when COVID first became what it was and first kind of kicked off, we had a lot of customers advocating to add a nonprofit that was directly supporting those suffering from COVID and also vaccine accessibility. So within 24 hours, we managed to add Direct Relief. We reached out to them. We vetted them as one of the, the largest charities that were responding to COVID-19. And we actually managed to get them up on the app within 24 hours. So we have a really cool way to directly respond to what's happening. And that's why I take customer suggestions very seriously. And it's a really good kind of measure for the causes that we work with. So I would say that the causes we work with change maybe every 3 years, but we are always adding new organizations and always listening to customer suggestions.
And it kind of goes back to that tech foundation where you have the ability to kind of, when things happen, whether it's notifications through the app, whether it's new things added very quickly, it seems like that speed of integration in the product is sort of seamless when you kind of have, again, that tech foundation of of building that way, and there's not maybe as much red tape you have to go through to get this stuff enacted.
Yeah, definitely. And I think charities respond really well to that, because I think nonprofits are not as digitally native yet as they need to be. And they respond really well to a tech company that's able to provide a really accessible route for them to interact with thousands of more customers. So it's really easy to get them on the app, and then the money gets fed back to them in the way that they might not have access to the same tech. So that's really what I love about the Lemonade product, is not only is it making it easy for customers to give back, but it's also providing that same tech accessibility and ease to nonprofits as well. So it's a really great and simple middleman between the nonprofit and the customer.
Going back to the data real quick for 1 second, what would you say it looks like from a geographical connection of, is it, US nonprofits, UK, Latin America, Africa? Like what, I guess geographically, where do you think the money's being impacted sort of the most?
So what we try and do is make the give back and the impact as local as possible. So anytime we expand into a new market, we actually add nonprofits that are specific to that market. So in France, we only work with French nonprofits. In the UK, only with British nonprofits. So yeah, we try and keep the funding as centralized and as local as possible.
I love that. That's really interesting. So I guess, you've been sort of in this corporate world and role for a while now. I guess what are some advice you would give to, again, maybe people working at nonprofits, maybe they want to shift their career, maybe it's people graduating from college looking at the impact route is so more there's a lot more freedom now, right? Like you said, there's companies out there doing it. Almost every company is enacting a social impact department in some way, shape, or form. Nonprofit is not the only route. And so what advice would you give to people, wanting to shift into the corporate world, but also have some of that passion still be a part of their job?
I have this conversation almost weekly with social impactors and people working in nonprofits or people graduating from universities that are trying to break into the social impact space. And after being in the corporate world, I would say the most important thing is to, really think outside of the box and not look at the company in a surface level way. So for example, when you first hear about Lemonade, it's an insurance company. You might not think there is a social impact avenue embedded into the company, and therefore you might not even explore if there's a social impact job waiting for you at this company. So whenever I speak to people, I say, don't look at your typical companies. Make sure that you push yourself to look at companies that might have a social impact angle that might be slightly more hidden or concealed, but is definitely there. A lot of climate techs, there's a lot of sexual harassment apps now coming out, a lot of women rights techs. You could be looking more at the femtech space and automatically that just has a social impact angle integrated.
Yeah, that's a great point. I want to kind of end a little bit on, the future, maybe some goals that you have, even if it's on your personal journey or your journey as a team, but what do the next 3 to 5 years look like?
I think our mission is primarily to keep spreading the word of corporate social impact. That to me is a real priority. I want to make sure that there are companies out there that know that social impact doesn't need to be an afterthought, but something you can really integrate into your product and into your tech. So to keep talking about it, keep doing, having conversations just like this one, making sure that people know that social impact is an avenue and a career opportunity that is available to them. I want to make sure that the social impact space is really accessible. One of my key passions is mentoring. I do a lot of different mentoring programs, and I'm really trying to make sure that the social impact space is diversified and becomes as accessible as possible because it's an amazing career opportunity. And I would also say, I think a lot of companies, as they grow, start to shy away from the social impact element. But as a company that I've seen Lemonade's growth firsthand. I was an early employee and now I'm seeing it as a public company. I know that you can keep up your social impact and your philanthropy even as you grow, and it doesn't need to fall to the side as long as you maintain, transparency and authenticity around it. So I would say spreading both those messages is really important to us as a team.
Well, thank you so much, Nina. This was awesome. I'm so glad we finally got to do this. I've been following what you're doing for a while, and what Lemonade's been doing for a while, just as a company. And it's funny because I first found them as just like a startup, had nothing to do with impact, right? And then I looked at it and I was like, oh wait, this is really interesting, like kind of what they're doing, innovating in the insurance space, just building entirely, tech related insurance, like building something modern for our generation. But then also, like you said, looking just a little bit under the hood, you could see the impact sort of built into the foundation as well. And I just always thought that was a great approach. And I was like, and then they went public, and I was just like, see, it can happen. You can sort of build, from a place of passion at a foundational level as a company, still be successful on the business side, because obviously that is the priority, because there's no impact without revenue and profitability. So that'll always be the number one thing. But to embed it into the foundation of a company, I think, to me, that is the innovation of brands and company structure as we go forward. We talk about innovation in tech, but innovation in company structure is also really a powerful way to get things done. So great work by you and the team, and best of luck for the next decade.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me on. I'm so happy to have done this.